Beware the Skinwalkers, warlocks who don the shape of animals to enact dark deeds, or maybe demons who shift between human and inhuman forms. Either way, it's a good idea to run now. This world is a strange one. People encounter strange beings every day, and we hear several stories about it. But have you ever wondered what might have happened to those mysterious missing people cases? Those people that were never found? Perhaps they were taken by the Skinwalkers. No one really knows what Skinwalkers truly want with us, but the fact is, they hunt us when they see an opportunity. Tonight, I have 5 true Skinwalker scary stories to share with you. So take off those hiking boots. You don't want to go into the woods today. Have you ever experienced or seen something horrifying while hunting? Send us your story at darknessprevails.org/submit, and it may appear in a new video. Also, we now have a podcast. I have been uploading certain older episodes of the show to iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and SoundCloud, so you can listen to us on the go and even download episodes. Don't forget to look us up. Now, back to those creepy creature stories. Number 1. Skinwalker in Big Bear. Submitted by Flame Daisy. My husband and I are avid campers. We live in Southern California and go out to the San Bernardino Mountains as often as possible with our 2 dogs. I am from Oregon and grew up in the woods, did search and rescue religiously, and spent much of my time going on trail rides and hikes as much as possible. Just to give you an idea on how much experience I have. We've been married for 2 years and have already been on over 20 camping trips, trying to visit as many different spots as possible, sometimes even switching campsites for a weekend, only spending one night. But this last trip scared the camper out of me, and it may be a while until I'm ready to return to the woods. We stopped by a favorite of ours called Holcomb Valley Campground. We set up camp, played with the dogs, and went for a small walk on the many back roads and some short trails, just revisiting our favorite areas. The dogs were behaving as normal, running around off-leash and playing. We were comfortable and calm, and came back to dinner and hot chocolate before it got too cold, and we slipped into the tent for the night. At the time, I was pregnant. I have to go to the bathroom often during the night, and I got up around 2 in the morning. I grabbed a flashlight and brought one of our dogs, a golden retriever, with me. Now, don't let the reputation of the golden retriever fool you about mine. He was raised without much contact with other people except for family, and with our other dog, a pit bull mutt. Moose, our golden, is very alert, doesn't like other people, and growls to warn them off, especially after we became pregnant. He is overprotective of me. Both our dogs are fit and they're used to camping and going off leash. They don't leave our sides. So Moose and I made our way to the bathrooms, and of course he came with me. He stuck by my side as usual. While I was doing my business, Moose's ears pricked up and he growled his get away growl. I was nervous. I didn't bring my knife like an idiot, and all I had was a flashlight. I figured it was just someone needing to use the restroom. I ordered Moose to stay by my side and we left, but no one was there. Moose's hackles were up so high he looked huge, and he was pressed up against my legs so tightly it made me almost have to pee again. But we fast walked all the way back to our tent and jumped in. I made sure my knife was there. My husband was fine and our pit bull was okay too. Everything was great, and Moose even relaxed a bit, laying down right next to my head, and I eventually fell asleep. Now, here's where it gets really disturbing. I woke up about 45 minutes later to a low woof from Moose and our pit bull growling. They were listening intently to my side of the tent, both of them nearly shaking. I put a hand on them to calm them down, and that only made them jump and growl even more. My husband is such a heavy sleeper, I knew I couldn't wake him, so I got a knife ready and I listened. I would say whatever it was about 40 to 50 feet away from us. It was stalking over the fence that divided the campsite from the road. It sounded deer-like, with light feet just barely crunching over the ground. I had been camping with herds of deer before, and it sounded very much like that, and our dogs had never seen a deer before, so I gave it to them that they might be scared. I lay back down and just quieted them, saying very clearly, "Shh, it's okay guys, it's just a deer." But then the deer outside said something, in almost my same voice. Just a deer. This voice said it like it was practicing something. Like how you rehearse a line you just can't get right in a speech. I gasped so hard my dog started barking like crazy. My husband jumped up and hollered at them for scaring him. I listened for the thing again, almost in tears. But the sound never came. The dogs were on edge for what seemed like hours until they finally calmed down, and it wasn't until then that I could finally fall asleep. When I woke up the next time, it was from a bad dream. I just remember running barefoot, and my feet were cold from being outside of the sleeping bag. It was nearly 5 in the morning, and the dogs were on edge again. This time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my knife and sat up listening to everything. I said clearly, "Are you there?" towards the direction of the fence, but nothing said anything. I think I repeated myself about 2 more times until a coyote howled. It was far away and clear, and I was starting to calm down, thinking I was silly for thinking that something like a skinwalker was out there, when the coyote howled again, this time much, much closer to us, like right across the road. And this one was not a coyote. It was a high-pitched yip that would end in a hoarse growl. It did it again and again, rehearsing the howl over and over. My husband woke up to this, asking me if it was a coyote. Petrified, I told him I didn't think so. This thing howled for over 10 minutes until it stopped and finally left. My dogs were just as scared as I was. That morning we went for another walk, then packed our things to move to the next campsite. Our moose ended up vomiting most of the day, and that made me panic. He was on edge so he couldn't keep anything down, and our pit bull was listening to anything and everything, never leaving our sides for a moment. That night, we were at a completely different campsite on the other side, so luckily nothing happened, and the dogs were able to get some sleep. But the next day, we stopped in Big Bear for lunch. Moose was all better at that time, and we all went for a walk in the village when we ran into our neighbors we recognized at Holcomb Valley Campground. We asked them about the coyote, and they suddenly went pale. They told us about what happened that night. We'll call the woman Mary and the man Ben. They had a small dog named Benji. So they said Benji had to go out in the middle of the night, so they unzipped the tent and let him do his business. He just ran to the fence and was barking until Ben went out and got him. Ben said that across the road, he saw a man standing there, and when he waved his hand, the man ran away into the woods. All night, Benji and the other dogs were barking like crazy until a few hunters went to investigate. They had their bows and a couple of knives, a few trained hunting dogs too. They crossed the road and went after the man to see if he needed help. They got about 20 feet into the woods when this man screamed at them with something between a coyote and something from a scary movie. It woke everyone up, and one guy claimed that the thing shifted before them into something like a deer with impossibly thin legs, and it bounded away faster than any animal he had ever seen. My husband doesn't believe in this kind of stuff. He shrugged it off as people being tired and the night being so dark. But I know that it was a skinwalker, and that's more than enough to keep me away and to keep me up at night. So for people who love to camp up in Big Bear, be careful when you venture up into the hills. There's something up there. Number 2. Whatever it was, it followed me. Submitted by Nodo Bird. It was a summer just a few years ago. I slept in a bunk bed with my brothers in the room that we shared. I woke up one night from the top bunk. Like I said, it was summer, and it tends to get stuffy at night, so the window was open. I could hear a very slow, raspy breathing and the sound of the screen from the window being scratched. I quietly rolled over onto my stomach and looked over to the side of the bed down at the window. It looked like a man, but its features were just wrong. It was as pale as the moon and bone thin. It had long arms, and it had a hand with long fingers scratching at the screen of the window. Its eyes gave off a soft glow, and they sort of lit up the room a little bit. It was just looking around the room from behind the window. It wasn't even trying to get in, it was just examining the room. From what I could tell, it hadn't spotted me yet, and I couldn't get out of bed without it seeing me, so I just crawled to the other side of the bed, the side by the door, and I lay silently, terrified until morning. It left after about an hour, judging by the digital clock on top of the TV. The next morning, I went outside and studied the window. Whatever had been there had to have been at least 7 feet tall, because the window was about 5 feet off the ground and this thing was hunched over. A few weeks go by, and I go on a camping trip. My brothers were in Boy Scouts, and I was allowed to go on the camping trips with them, which I loved because I've always loved the forest. It was in this enormous forest in the middle of nowhere. The property belongs to someone from Scouts, and there's nobody else for miles. Everything goes fine. It was a fun day of fishing and hiking and s'mores. Everyone's about to get in their tents for the night. Then everyone is silenced by an echoing, blood-curdling scream. It was definitely, absolutely not a fox, and there haven't been any mountain lions in the entire state for centuries, so it couldn't have been one of those either. Somehow, and I don't know how, everyone was able to get some sleep after that. I convinced myself to get into the big family tent, and soon, feeling safe and warm, I'm out cold. I woke up to the sound of the tent fabric being scratched at. I look around, and on one of the nylon walls, long scratches are being made periodically from the outside. I turn on the lantern hanging from the ceiling, and it stops. I can see its silhouette. It's the same thing from only weeks before. Large, tall, bone-thin with long arms and legs. It creeps away. It begins to do the same thing to the other tents around the campsite. I wait for it to finally leave, and I turn off the lantern, staring and in shock. I was somehow able to fall asleep. My dad's really into paranormal stuff, but I honestly don't know how he'd take all this. I haven't told it much, and every person who cared to listen just didn't take it seriously. I haven't seen it since, thank God, but whatever it was had followed me from my house in the suburbs to the forest out of town. I've always slept on the other side of the bed since then, away from my window. After doing some research, I think this mostly matches the creatures known as Skinwalkers or maybe a Wendigo. Number 3. Thing in the Forest. Submitted by Cole. Okay, so for privacy reasons, I will not be using my real name. In the story, my name is Cole. I was in middle school and 14 when this happened. In California, we tend to go out hunting, or if you can't, then you play hide and seek and other games like manhunt and stuff. My friends and I were playing hide and seek. Their names are Zach, Jordan, Amelia, and Joe. Zach was it. We all charged away from our houses and into the woods. Joe and I hid in trees and not far apart, maybe a few trees away. It was getting dark when we started, so it was probably 9:45. Also, the seeker had a flashlight. Joe and I were waiting to get caught and were whispering to each other when out of nowhere, heavy crunching of leaves came from the left. There was no light and we thought it might be Jordan, but we didn't call his name in case it was an animal. The crunching was about 20 feet away, then it stopped. I heard a very quiet scraping noise, then the scraping started again, even closer, like it had come 10 feet closer in 5 seconds without making any noise at all. Joe and I heard a tree branch snap and looked where it might have come from. This thing was in a tree in the middle between me and Joe. It was very long and had some hair on its arms and legs, and no hair anywhere else, and had sharp, stubby-like claws for climbing. It had ripped up the branch it was on. This thing was looking at me now. I was scared out of my mind. It made a roar or a hiss, and in a fraction of a second, it was on the second tree closer to me. I jumped down and screamed with all my might. "Get away! Joe, run!" The creature was now in the tree that I was in merely seconds before. Joe heard me and jumped out of his tree, and we ran so fast that we were in my house in a snap. We heard loud, ripping noises coming from the woods. We took my dad's flashlight that can light up a distance of 50 feet and shined it at the tree. The tree was torn apart. Then we heard insanely deafening steps. We shined it in the forest again, and it was making its way toward us. It was over 9 feet tall, with black eyes and huge hands. We flew inside, locked all the windows and doors, and called our parents and the police. Jordan, Amelia, and Zach ran inside when they heard us screaming. I don't know what I saw that cold day, and I'm glad I made it out alive at all. Number 4. Something was at the door. Submitted by Nathaniel Olive. My name is Nathaniel, but most of my family members called me Nate or Nathan. And by the time these events had happened, I had fully moved out of my aunt's acreage and had been living in my creepy house for about 5 years. I had turned 11, and I had come to visit my aunt and uncle for a family get-together to say hi and hang out with my cousins. I will give a little background information about the house. It was built by my aunt and uncle before I was born, and it lay on a hill with part of the basement not inside of the ground because the hill is sloped. The part of the house that is not in the dirt faces the woods and has 3 windows on the left side of the living room and a large door that is on the left of the room that is right next to the last window toward the left of the living room. There is a large door that is on the left of the room that is right next to the last window of the left of the living room. There is also an inlet area to the very far right that has a counter or bar looking area. This is buried under the hill, so it doesn't have any windows. The living room is connected to the stairs that are in the hallway, and the hallway has a bathroom at the end of it. There are 2 spare rooms and a toy room on the right side. The toy room also leads into a room that connects to the outside through a little door and window. This room isn't usually locked because the door that leads to the toy room is locked 100% of the time. This door that connects to the toy room is made of wood and has a pane of misted, translucent glass. We ate dinner, and my mom and aunt decided to get drunk, so we were going to have to stay the night. My brother and I had to sleep in the basement, and I was fine with it because I had stayed there many times before. My brother and I were forced to stay in the same room downstairs by the living room, which faced the woods directly across from the house. The windows facing the forest are split up, and there are 3 of them on the left side of the room. They are 5 feet by 3 feet windows and are very large. The room also has a door on the right side of the room, just next to the last window on the left. This door doesn't have a lock on it, it's just a doorknob. It's not like I haven't seen wolves, coyotes, bears, and mountain lions, and since I am an avid hunter, I'm quite sure the thing I saw that night was not any of them. During the night, around 3 in the morning, I had gotten up to get a drink, and while I was in the washroom, I heard a tapping sound from the living room, and then I heard my name called. "Nathaniel, come here." The voice called in my mom's voice, and I found this weird because she usually calls me Nathan, but she was intoxicated, so I didn't feel too concerned. Thinking she was drunk and was sleeping on the downstairs living room couch, I peered around the corner of the hallway to look into the living room. This, however, was a mistake because what I saw was a large figure standing about 5 feet from the window. The only features it had that I could see were its arms that were very long and had a full set of creepy, spindly fingers. Its torso was very thick at the top, but turned into a V shape as it went down towards the waist. I could not see the head because it was so tall the head was out of view. As I watched it, it began to move towards the door that leads into the living room, and with a long thin arm it reached for the handle. Seeing this happen seriously disturbed me, and I knew I needed to scream. So that is what I did. I screamed so loud that I woke up everyone in the house, including my very drunk aunt and mother. Before I knew what was happening, the thing at the door bolted into the woods, and these woods are about 50 feet from the door. And it made that run in about 1.5 seconds flat. As I watched it running before it went into the woods, it went down onto all 4s and disappeared into the pitch black darkness of the forest. About 10 seconds after this, my uncle came down the stairs with his loaded shotgun that he kept in the house. He saw me on the floor just outside the living room, almost pissing myself. He knew I had seen something and asked what it was. I told him, but he just shrugged it off because he thought I had seen a wolf or coyote outside the door. The worst part was, when I went up to the door and looked at the knob, I realized it hadn't been locked. I'm 18 now, and I have not stayed at this house until recently, about 2 months ago. This time I stayed the night because my uncle and I were going out the next day on a week-long camping trip to go hunting and fishing. I again had to stay in that basement in the guest room next to the living room. I didn't really feel unsafe that night until I was awakened by a noise in the toy room across from my room. A tapping noise, and then a voice that sounded like my uncle's but strangely weird.
"Nathaniel, come here and give me a hand."
By this time, I was seriously freaked out, and I looked outside my room into the toy room. Inside that room, I could see the door that connects to the next room, and through the glass, I could see the figure. The same figure I had seen so many years ago, standing there and tapping on the pane of the glass. I went up to the hallway connecting door and slammed it shut, and collapsed against it, beginning to cry. My aunt and uncle heard the door slam and ran downstairs to see me crying. They asked what happened, and they asked me a very creepy question. Did you see the thing? This thing that's been bothering us for years? I looked up at them, and I could see the fear in their eyes. I nodded, and they sat next to me and gave me a hug. The next morning, my uncle and I headed out, and we went on our trip. Before going, we looked in the room I saw the figure in that night, and on the other side of the pane of glass, there was a chip that wasn't there the day before. Apparently, after I had seen this thing 7 years earlier, it had begun to torment my cousins by tapping on their windows and calling in their mom and dad's voices, calling their names and asking to be let in. This thing, whatever it is, it still comes almost every month to ask my cousins to be let in using their parents' voices. And number 5. I Wish It Was a Bear. Submitted by HuntingLove. This story, though it might come across as cliché, is very, very true, as both I and those involved swear by it. I will also be changing the names of the people involved, including my own. Having said that, let's continue. So we've all heard the stories about the neighborhood Wendigo, Skinwalker, or Dogman, or whatever you want to call it. Boy in a house out in the country at night, you know the drill. That's why I was rather reprehensive towards the idea that my father, who was divorced by my mother a good 4 years ago, would be moving in with a girl named Janet. She lived just outside a small town called Winthrop in Washington State, which has a measly population of 420. Her home was situated on a hill, on a large and rather secluded property that featured access to a creek and train track by trail. She had a front yard that was damn near an acre, with a thin line of trees around the edge. The rest of it was a clearing that would allow her 2 dogs, Rusty and Ranger, to graze during the day. At night, though, the field would become so dark that I couldn't see past the midpoint in perfect conditions. On one end of the field was a small dirt road in which people like me and my father could access the property from the highway. On the opposite end, closer to the forest, was Janet's home. If one were to look over the field from Janet's porch, there was a fire pit to the right and a small garage to the left. My father had custody over me every other weekend, and lo and behold, I'd always be at Janet's home. Both Janet and my father smoked, and I'd sit with them during their nighttime cigarettes. With my back to the field and them sitting facing each other in parallel to the house, we'd just chat for sometimes hours on end. One night specifically, in the middle of the summer, we were chatting along until my father stopped abruptly. He was an avid believer in the Second Amendment, and I saw his hand drift to his side and onto his .40 Smith & Wesson. He looked over to the field, and both me and Janet turned with him. The dogs went mad, barking into the darkness, and then silence. When I say silence, I don't mean a lack of human voices. I mean a heavy silence fell over the forest. We could no longer hear the ambient sounds of animals out in the woods. The dogs stopped barking, and even the trees seemed to stop swaying in the breeze. I turned just to catch a small white blur at the right corner of my vision. I followed it, and all I saw was the gated entry of the trail swinging open in the breeze. Silence firmed its grip on the forest, that is, until a small rodent caused a twitch in the grass near the gate. I imagine the movement caused this, but what I saw seemed inexplainable. A white, humanoid figure that couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall with the glowing eyes of a predator sprinted and grabbed the rodent from the grass, rolling over it and eventually slowing to a stop. It took the rodent in hand, tearing it in half. When it made eye contact with us, I swear I heard what I thought sounded like Janet pissing herself. Her being the only one familiar with these woods, I took that as a sign that this was no common occurrence. We sat for what felt like hours, keeping eye contact with the monstrosity that sat before us. Without warning, it turned sharply and exited at full speed through the gate and into the woods. The rest of the night was quiet, though we all slept in the same room. We being Janet, my father, me, and my father's 40 cow. The next morning, my dad and I packed hastily so we could return me home. Soon after, my father found a new place to stay in the center of Tacoma. His fondness of the outdoors seemed to wane after that experience, and we are yet to return to Janet's home. Whether it's a creature mimicking the calls of humans and other animals, or an insatiable beast that stalks the woods, it seems possible for skinwalkers to take many shapes and forms. And who knows, maybe a few of these stories weren't of skinwalkers at all. Maybe they were wendigos with an appetite for flesh. Either way, these creatures want to get to you, and they'll stalk you wherever you go if they feel like it. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And make sure to visit darknessprevails.org to submit your own story, read hundreds more true accounts, listen to other videos for hours on end, and listen to our podcast. Thanks.